Calem Voss, human envoy and professional headache collector, stepped off the transport shuttle and into the chaos that was Port Ulysses, a swirling maelstrom of commerce and con artists, barely distinguishable from one another. The port was a wondrous monument to the galaxy's ability to cram as many bizarre species as possible into one place, all of them just as annoyed as he was. He sighed, peeling off his ill-fitted breathing mask, which was obligatory and utterly useless, much like most of his job. "Welcome to Port Ulysses, where dreams come to die and wallets go to get lighter," a mechanical voice crackled from a speaker embedded in the wall. "Have a nice day, or whatever." Calem snorted. "Charming as ever," he muttered. The announcer was a rusty old AI with all the enthusiasm of a rock hurtling through space. He'd heard it once called a customer service bot, which was funny considering its customer service skills were about on par with a hungry space slug. As he trudged through the throng of beings, each more exotic and irritable than the last, Calem was reminded of why he avoided these places like a Tellurian plague. It wasn't just the smell, a pungent mix of sweat, disappointment, and alien cuisines that defied classification, but the constant buzz of negotiation, thievery, and general misanthropy. A place where every smile was a lie and every handshake was likely to cost you a finger. He pushed through, past vendors hawking everything from genuine Grebulon crystals to authentic, Earth souvenirs no human had ever heard of. A three-legged creature with more eyes than sense tried to sell him a vintage human Rolex, which looked suspiciously like a child's toy painted gold. Calem waved it off with a grunt. His destination was a seedy little establishment known as the Cosmic Lament, a bar where the drinks were strong, and the patrons stronger. It was the kind of place where the lighting was dim enough to hide your sins, and the seats were sticky enough to make you part of the furniture. "Calem, you old space rat," a voice barked as soon as he walked in. The speaker was a hulking mass of scales and bad decisions named Gruel, the bar's owner and occasional fixer. "What brings you to this fine establishment, besides the obvious goal of getting yourself killed?" Calem grinned, accepting a battered mug of something that probably wouldn't kill him. "Oh, just the usual. Interstellar diplomacy, avoiding assassination, and trying not to get my boots stolen." Gruel laughed, a sound like gravel being stomped on by an elephant. "Heard about the trial? Who hasn't?" Calem replied, taking a swig and instantly regretting it. "Zephyria, the planet with a grudge, is accusing Avanta of ecological sabotage. Big words for bigger trouble. And you, lucky bastard, are the key witness." Calem raised an eyebrow. "Me? A witness? I wasn't even around when the alleged sabotage happened." Gruel shrugged, his scales clattering like marbles. "Doesn't matter. You're a human, and you know what they say about humans, always got a fresh perspective." "More like a death wish," Calem muttered. The bar was filled with the usual assortment of riffraff. A few shady-looking characters in the corner were engaged in what was either an intense game of cards or a very slow-motion fistfight. Everywhere you looked, deals were being made, promises broken, and occasionally, teeth knocked out. Calem leaned in closer to Gruel. "So, what's the real story?" Gruel snorted. "Zephyria claims Avanta's mining ops are wrecking their atmosphere. Avanta claims they're as innocent as a newborn star. Truth, probably somewhere in the middle, gasping for air." Calem sighed. "And why me?" "Because you're human," Gruel repeated, as if that explained everything. "Zephyria thinks you might see something the rest of us miss. Or maybe they just like having a scapegoat handy." Calem wiped his mouth, setting down the mug before it dissolved his insides. "Great, so I'm a glorified space janitor, cleaning up someone else's mess." "Pretty much. But hey, at least you've got a front row seat to the galaxy's latest spectacle." "Yeah," Calem grumbled, "and I've always wanted to be crushed by interstellar politics. Maybe next I'll try being a bug under a boot. Seems about as fun." Gruel chuckled. "You've got a way with words, Calem. Just make sure those words don't get you killed." Calem squared his shoulders, trying to appear more confident than he felt. "Guess I should go find the tribunal. See what kind of chaos they've got lined up for me this time." Gruel nodded. "Good luck, you'll need it." And Calem, "Yeah, try not to get yourself killed. I'm running out of people who still owe me money." Out in the corridor, Calem made his way towards the tribunal chamber. The halls were a jigsaw of metal and grime, a testament to a million patched jobs by a million different hands, none of which seemed to have a degree in engineering. Just as he was about to enter the chamber, a small, wiry alien darted out of a side corridor. It nearly collided with him, its eyes wide and frantic. "They're watching," it hissed, before scuttling away like it had just delivered the galaxy's most inconvenient truth. "Of course they are," Calem muttered to himself. "Aren't they always?" Inside, the tribunal chamber was a Spartan affair. Bare metal walls, uncomfortable seating, and a pervasive smell of burnt coffee and desperation. The judges, an eclectic mix of species, sat behind a raised dais, looking as bored and weary as Calem felt. "Ah, Mr. Voss," the lead judge, a reptilian creature with a voice like nails on a chalkboard, intoned. "We've been expecting you." Calem offered his most disarming smile, the one that always seemed to irritate people the most. "I assure you, the feeling is mutual." The judge's eyes narrowed. "You're here as a neutral observer in the matter of Zephyria versus Avanta. Do you have anything to declare before we begin?" "Just that I prefer not to be vaporized for other people's mistakes," Calem replied, earning a few chuckles from the gallery. "Noted," the judge said dryly. "Proceeding will commence shortly. Meanwhile, try to keep your lungs intact." Calem took a seat, his mind racing. He knew the stakes were high. Zephyria's entire ecosystem hung in the balance. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was a pawn in a game where everyone else had already read the rulebook. A pawn with a target painted on his back. The chamber filled with spectators, ranging from dignitaries to curious onlookers, all eager for a spectacle. The air buzzed with the sound of 1,000 quiet conversations, all speculating about the outcome of the trial. Calem leaned back, closing his eyes. Great, another day, another galactic crisis, he thought. Why couldn't I have been born a simple mushroom farmer? The tribunal came to order with a bang of a gavel that sounded suspiciously like a gunshot. Calem flinched, opening his eyes to see the lead judge glaring down at him. "Mr. Voss, pay attention," the judge snapped. "Your input may be required at any moment." "Sure," Calem replied, flashing a grin that hid his mounting anxiety. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." The first witness, a representative from Zephyria, took the stand. They were a tall, willowy figure, their skin a kaleidoscope of colors that shifted with their moods. As they spoke, Calem listened, trying to piece together the tangled web of deceit and half-truths. "Avanta's mining operations have devastated our atmosphere," the Zephyrian said, voice steady. "The delicate balance of our ecosystem is in jeopardy." Calem arched an eyebrow. "And this is where I come in, huh? To figure out who's holding all the cards and who's bluffing with a pair of twos." The Avantorian representative was next, a stout, bulldog-like creature with a permanent scowl etched into their face. "We deny all allegations," they growled, fists clenched. "Our operations follow every regulation. This is nothing more than a smear campaign." Calem stifled a yawn. "Sure, because no one in the galaxy has ever lied for profit." As the testimonies continued, he found himself wondering why he was here at all. An outsider amongst outsiders, trying to make sense of a conflict that seemed to have no right or wrong, just varying shades of screwed. Finally, the lead judge turned to him. "Mr. Voss, as the human representative, do you have any insights to offer?" Calem rose, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes on him. "Just one," he said, voice carrying across the chamber. "In my experience, there are 3 sides to every story: yours, theirs, and the truth." The room fell silent, 1,000 breath held in anticipation. "And right now," Calem continued, running a hand through his hair, "I think we're all just trying to figure out which version of the truth we can live with." The judge nodded, expression inscrutable. "A fair point, Mr. Voss." Calem sat down, his pulse pounding in his ears. He'd played his part, for what it was worth. Now, all that was left was to see where the chips would fall. As the tribunal continued, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes probing his every move. It was a sensation he was all too familiar with, the shadowy touch of intrigue and danger. "Here's hoping I make it out of this one alive," he thought, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Or at least with my skin still attached." Calem sat there, letting the AI announcer drone on about procedural justice and impartial hearings, which, if you asked him, was just a more official way of saying, "We're about to screw someone over, but we'll pretend it's fair." The room buzzed with tensions so thick you could bottle it and sell it as an anxiety aid. He glanced at the Avantorian representative again, who was glaring at him like Calem was responsible for their planet's worst hangover. "What's your problem?" Calem muttered under his breath, half hoping they'd hear him. No such luck. They were too busy pretending their mining operations didn't make more smoke than a pyromaniac's birthday. The next witness, a Zephyrian hydrologist, took the stand. They looked like a walking neon sign, all colors and no chill. "Our water reserves are depleting at an alarming rate," they said, their voice oscillating like a malfunctioning radio tuner. "We hold Avanta fully responsible." Calem shook his head. "Right, because blaming the folks who've been mining your planet dry since before your ancestors mastered fire would be too straightforward," he muttered to himself, earning a sharp look from the lead judge. The judge, this time a crusty old thing with a face like crumpled parchment, leafed through some documents like they actually meant anything. "Mr. Voss," they croaked, as though they'd been gargling gravel for breakfast, "your survey report from Zephyria might be of interest to this tribunal." Calem blinked. "My what now?" His last trip to Zephyria had been half-baked at best, mostly because he'd spent it trying not to get eaten by the local wildlife. The survey had seemed like an afterthought, a bit like flossing after you've already gone to bed. The judge's eyes narrowed, a gesture that suggested they were using their last nerve on him. Your survey, the one you conducted last month. Ah, that survey, Calem said, feigning realization. His data probably consisted of a few rushed scans and some half-hearted notes scribbled on the back of a napkin. Hard to believe it could hold the fate of 2 planets. Then again, this was interstellar politics, where a coin toss could qualify as expert testimony. He fumbled in his jacket pocket, pulling out a battered portable data pad. He activated it with a reluctant beep, projecting a holographic display of his findings. Here we go, he announced, trying to sound more confident than he felt. On the screen, a series of fluctuating graphs and convoluted pie charts appeared, each one less comprehensible than the last. Calem cleared his throat. As you can see, there's stuff happening. Bad stuff. Possibly related to mining. Possibly related to the fact that Zephyria's atmosphere is about as stable as a caffeine addict on decaf. Be specific, Mr. Voss, the judge growled, their patience thinner than a politician's promise. I'd love to, Calem said, but what you're looking at is 2 weeks of technical jargon crammed into an hour of desperate data collection. According to this, he pointed at a chart that fluctuated more wildly than a gambler's pulse. Mining has likely disrupted the natural flow of atmospheric currents. It's not definite, but it's a pattern. The Zephyrian representative leaned forward, their skin shifting to a hopeful green. And this is enough to implicate Avanta? Calem shrugged. It's enough to suggest that someone should maybe stop strip mining the place like it's a buffet with no closing time. The Avantorian representative glared daggers at him. If looks could kill, Calem would have been vaporized into a fine mist. These allegations are baseless, they snapped. Avanta operates within all legal parameters. Legal, sure, Calem grinned, that irritating smile he'd perfected. But just because it's legal doesn't mean it's not disastrous. The tribunal murmured among themselves, the kind of low, conspiratorial noise that promised nothing good for Calem. He didn't like being the center of attention, especially when it felt like the universe had its crosshairs trained on him. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Silverthra, the Zephyrian ambassador, watching him with an intensity that suggested they were either very interested in his findings or planning to sell his organs to the highest bidder. Both options seemed equally plausible. Mr. Voss, Silverthra finally spoke, their voice smooth and serpentine. Would you be willing to testify further on the disruptions your report indicates? Testify further, Calem repeated, stalling for time. Like, in front of everyone here? Under oath? Yes, Silverthra replied, their gaze unblinking. Calem sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy who stumbled over something that might be important. But I'll help however I can. Just, don't expect miracles. Or even minor miracles. Silverthra nodded, their expression unreadable. Your honesty is appreciated, if rare. Rare, Calem snorted. In this place, honesty's about as common as a politician's diet plan. As the tribunal continued to dissect his findings, Calem found his mind wandering back to his time on Zephyria. The mission had been a disaster from the get-go, the kind where everything that could go wrong did, and then had the audacity to go wrong again for good measure. But somewhere in that mess, he'd apparently found something worthwhile. Or at least something worth arguing about. He just hoped it wouldn't also be the thing that got him killed. After what felt like an eternity, the tribunal adjourned for a recess. The spectators filtered out, leaving Calem with a moment of rare, blessed silence. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes and trying to ignore the sensation of impending doom. You look like you've been through a meteor shower, a voice remarked. Calem opened one eye to find Silverthra standing nearby, a curious look on their face. And you look like you just walked off the cover of a fashion magazine from hell, he retorted, unable to resist a jab. Silverthra's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. I've been called worse, they said. Your testimony was intriguing. Yeah, well, Calem shrugged. I aim to confuse and annoy in equal measure. You're succeeding, Silverthra replied dryly. Calem grinned. Good to know I'm hitting my stride. Silverthra studied him, their gaze piercing. Your report could change the course of this trial. Are you prepared for the consequences? Prepared? Calem let out a bark of laughter. I'm never prepared for anything. I just make it up as I go along and hope I don't end up as space dust. A pragmatic approach. More like a desperate one, Calem corrected. But thanks for the vote of confidence. Silverthra inclined their head, a gesture that managed to convey both agreement and a warning. The tribunal will resume shortly. I suggest you take this time to recalibrate. Calem nodded, watching as they left, their movements smooth and deliberate. He took a deep breath, trying to slow the racing of his heart. Recalibrate, he muttered to himself. More like, don't have a mental breakdown. He stood up, stretching out muscles that felt like they'd been twisted into pretzels. The tribunal chamber was still, the kind of silence that only comes when everyone's holding their breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Well, Calem, he said to himself, looks like you've stumbled into another mess. Let's just hope it doesn't end with you in a body bag. He wandered over to the makeshift refreshment area, eyeing the offerings with suspicion. There was something vaguely coffee-like steaming in a pot, and he poured himself a mug, sniffing it cautiously. It smelled like burned promises and regret, but caffeine was caffeine. Cheers, he muttered, raising the mug in a mock toast before taking a sip. It tasted worse than it smelled, but he downed it anyway, hoping it would give him the jolt he needed to survive the rest of the day. The tribunal chamber began to fill up again, delegates and spectators filing back to their seats. Calem took his place, trying to look more confident than he felt. As the proceedings resumed, he felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on him once more. He was in the thick of it now, and there was no turning back. He could only hope his next move wouldn't be his last. The judge cleared their throat, the sound reverberating through the chamber like a death knell. The tribunal will reconvene, they announced. Mr. Voss, your presence is requested on the stand. Calem rose, feeling a chill run down his spine. It was time to face the music, even if it turned out to be a funeral dirge. As he stepped forward, he tried to summon the bravado that had carried him this far, the irreverence that had kept him alive in a galaxy that seemed hell-bent on doing him in. Because if there was one thing Calem Voss was good at, it was surviving against the odds. Or at least pretending he could. Calem Voss stood at the tribunal stand, the galaxy's least wanted spokesperson. He mentally checked his dignity at the door, like a coat you knew you'd never see again. The judge, a relic who looked like they'd been defrosted for this occasion, gestured for silence. Mr. Voss, they intoned, with all the enthusiasm of a sloth on sedatives. Calem cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the chamber like a sad trombone. Good to be here, he lied, glancing around at the assembly of alien delegates, each one wearing an expression that ranged from indifferent to homicidal. Let's get this over with, he continued, before I die of anticipation or boredom, whichever comes first. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a wave of passive-aggressive tension. Silverthra, the Zephyrrian ambassador, caught his eye with a nod that could mean anything from supportive agreement to, I hope you choke on your own tongue. The judge raised a hand for silence, a futile gesture at best. We're here to discuss the potential environmental impact of Avanta's mining operations on Zephyria. Mr. Voss, your report indicates significant disruption. Can you elaborate? Calem sighed, feeling the weight of a million words he didn't want to say. Well, Judge, if it looks like a disaster and smells like a disaster, it's probably going to kick you in the teeth like a disaster. The Avantorian representative, a creature with all the charm of a tax audit, leaned forward. This tribunal requires evidence, Mr. Voss, not melodrama. Evidence? Calem asked, feigning surprise. I thought we were all here for the coffee. The representative's glare could have melted titanium. Your sarcasm doesn't help your case. Neither does your face, Calem muttered under his breath, loud enough for only half the room to hear. Another ripple of disapproval, but Calem continued, plowing through the formalities like a space pirate on a joyride. Look, the data's not perfect. It's more like a Picasso than a portrait. But it's clear something's screwing with Zephyria, and unless you've got a better theory than cosmic prank, I'd say mining's your culprit. The judge drummed their fingers on the stand, each tap a reminder of how little they cared for theatrics. Your conclusions are speculative at best. Fair enough, Calem conceded with a shrug. But speculation's all we've got until someone does a proper study. And by the looks of things, that's about as likely as me getting a vacation. Silverthra rose, their expression a mask of diplomatic neutrality. Given the severity of the situation, perhaps we should consider halting Avanta's operations until further investigation can be conducted. The Avantorian representative snorted, a sound that could have peeled paint. This is preposterous. Avanta's activities are sanctioned by the Galactic Charter. Sanctioned, Calem echoed, like a punch in the face from someone wearing a badge. The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch, the kind of pressure that made you wonder if your head would pop like an overripe fruit. Calem resisted the urge to scratch an itch that had nothing to do with his skin and everything to do with the weight pressing down on him. Perhaps a short recess, the judge suggested, their voice betraying an eagerness to escape the impending explosion. To allow emotions to cool. Calem nodded, grateful for the reprieve. He stepped down from the stand, his legs feeling like they'd been swapped with lead pipes. The chamber emptied, delegates dispersing like a schoolyard brawl put on hold. He found a corner of the room that offered some semblance of privacy, though in a place like this, privacy was as mythical as a politician's promise. He leaned against the wall, pulling out his battered datapad, a lifeline to some semblance of sanity. Nice performance, a voice drawled, breaking his momentary peace. Calem looked up to see Taruk, a fellow human envoy and professional opportunist. Taruk's grin was as sharp as a knife and about as friendly. You here to offer advice, or just rub salt in the wound? Taruk shrugged, the gesture dismissive. Came to check if you needed help. Or an escape plan. Plan B, maybe, Calem replied. Plan A's still, don't get vaporized. Good plan, Taruk said, crossing their arms. But you've got more enemies than friends in there. Politics is a contact sport, and you're playing without a helmet. Calem smirked, though it felt more like baring his teeth. Always had a thick skull. Comes in handy. Sure, Taruk said, unconvinced. Just watch your back. I hear they're looking for volunteer martyrs. Noted, Calem replied, though he knew the warning was redundant. He'd been aware of the invisible targets on his back since he'd set foot in this mess. As Taruk walked away, Calem tried to focus on his datapad, scrolling through the chaotic mess of his report. It was like trying to untangle a ball of yarn with your fingers taped together. Every line of text seemed to mock him, a reminder of just how little he actually knew. Recalibrate, he muttered to himself again. Or self-destruct, whichever's faster. His thoughts were interrupted by another presence, this time less friendly. The Avantorian representative had returned, their demeanor colder than a vacuum breach. Mr. Voss, a word. Calem eyed them warily, like a cat assessing a particularly mean dog. Sure, I've got a few to spare. The rep's smile didn't reach their eyes. I'd like to remind you of your responsibilities. Humanity's reputation is at stake, and you're in a position to either uphold or tarnish it. Subtle, Calem remarked, sarcasm dripping from the word like acid. I'll keep that in mind. See that you do, the representative said, their tone sliding from threatening to condescending. It would be unfortunate if your actions were misconstrued as hostile. Hostile, Calem repeated, feigning shock. I thought I was being downright charming. The rep's expression didn't change, a mask of unyielding stone. We wouldn't want this tribunal to end poorly for anyone involved. Of course not, Calem replied, matching their tone with one of his own. Wouldn't want anyone to get the wrong idea. The representative nodded, satisfied enough to take their leave. Calem watched them go, the tension in his shoulders refusing to ease even in their absence. Great, he muttered to himself. One more person who wants to see me dead. Could open a club at this rate. The tribunal resumed before he had a chance to rest properly. Calem squared his shoulders and returned to the stand, the weight of expectation settling back onto him like a second skin. The judge gestured for silence once more, the room obeying with reluctance. Mr. Voss, we require further clarification on your findings. Clarification, Calem echoed, his voice tinged with something between exhaustion and defiance. All right, bottom line. Keep up with your mining, and Zephyrria's screwed. Stop, and it might have a chance. Anything else is just semantics. Silverthra spoke up, their voice smooth as ever. It seems prudent to err on the side of caution. The Avantorian representative opened their mouth to counter, but Calem cut him off. Look, I get it. Avanta's got money to make, and Zephyria's just a rock in the way. But if that rock cracks, it's not just Zephyria that suffers. We're all breathing the same cosmic dust. A ripple of uneasy agreement passed through the assembly, the delegates murmuring to one another in hushed tones. Calem could feel the tide turning, though whether it was in his favor or against him was anyone's guess. The judge interjected, their voice slicing through the chatter. We will adjourn for deliberations. A final decision will be reached within the next cycle. As the room emptied once more, Calem remained in place, an island in a sea of retreating tides. He felt the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him, the kind of pressure that could crush planets and dreams alike. Silverthra approached, their expression unreadable. You've done well, Mr. Voss. Have I? Calem asked, his voice threaded with doubt. Feels more like I've just painted a target on my back. Silverthra inclined their head, a gesture of understanding. The galaxy is a dangerous place. But you've given us hope. Hope, Calem repeated, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. Guess that's worth something. Silverthra nodded once more before departing, leaving Calem alone in the tribunal chamber. He closed his eyes, letting the silence wash over him like a balm, however temporary. In the end, he couldn't predict the outcome. He was just one man in a universe that cared little for individuals. But for now, he'd done his part, played his hand, and hoped against hope that it wouldn't come back to bite him. Well, Calem, he said to himself, opening his eyes to the empty room, here's to surviving another day. Maybe even another week, if I'm lucky. He stood there a moment longer, knowing full well that luck was rarely on his side. But then, neither was he on its. As the tribunal's doors clanged shut behind him, Calem found himself wandering down the endless corridors of Port Ulysses. The place was a veritable labyrinth of bureaucracy and backstabbing, where every turn promised the opportunity to lose your way or your wallet. He needed a drink, a brain reset, and maybe a bulletproof vest, not necessarily in that order. He ducked into the Cosmic Lament, which had all the charm of a low-rent asteroid with a liquor license. The place was a magnet for space rats and shady deals, and tonight was no exception. Calem found a spot at the bar, squeezing between a Zephyrrian hydrologist nursing a cocktail that looked like engine coolant and a bounty hunter who probably had more warrants out than friends. Calem Voss, the bartender greeted, sliding over a glass without asking. On the house, assuming you don't burn this place down with your charm. I'll try to keep the fire to a minimum, Calem replied, tipping the glass back. The drink was strong enough to burn away a few regrets and maybe a memory or two. So, how goes the tribunal? The bartender asked, leaning in like they were sharing a secret. Gonna save the universe or just yourself this time? Calem shrugged, the weight of responsibility already creeping back onto his shoulders. Depends on who you ask. Could be I save no one and piss off everyone. Always a good day in the office. The bartender chuckled, moving down the bar to serve someone else. Calem turned his focus to the swirling chaos of his thoughts, trying to untangle the conspiracy that had started to take shape in his mind. The more he thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to align like some cosmic jigsaw puzzle from hell. He'd stumbled upon something big, something ugly, and it had more teeth than a Tyrannosaurus with a jawache. The whole scenario stank worse than the recycled air in the bar, and he was starting to suspect it wasn't just the Avantorians who had their fingers in the pie, but a whole network of vested interests, all eyeing Zephyria like vultures circling a carcass. A soft cough interrupted his train of thought. Calem turned to see Silverthra sliding onto the stool next to him, their expression as neutral as always. Mr. Voss, a word. Just one, Calem quipped. Make it a good one. Silverthra didn't rise to the bait, their gaze steady. You might want to be cautious about the company you keep. Calem chuckled, though there was no real humor in it. Careful who you talk to. That's just another Tuesday around here. Indeed, Silverthra replied, their voice barely above a whisper. But I've heard whispers. There are interests at stake. Large ones. Bigger than Avanta? Calem asked, raising an eyebrow. Interplanetary, Silverthra confirmed, their voice a cool breeze on a sweltering day. And they don't take kindly to interference. Calem nodded, the weight of the revelation settling into his bones like an unwelcome guest. So I'm not just on Avanta's hit list. Lovely. Guess I should start planning that vacation sooner rather than later. Caution, Mr. Voss, Silverthra said, rising from their seat. And discretion. Calem watched them go, the implications swirling in his mind like the dregs of his drink. He'd known there was more at play than the tribunal's surface-level squabbles, but this was starting to feel like the tip of a very large, very dangerous iceberg. He tossed back the rest of his drink, the burn a comforting reminder that he was still here, still flesh and blood in a galaxy that seemed intent on grinding him into dust. He decided to take a walk, hoping the exercise might help clear the cobwebs from his mind. As he navigated the corridors, Calem couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Paranoia was a constant companion in his line of work, but this was different, more insidious. He half expected to turn a corner and find a knife waiting for him. Instead, what he found was Taruk, leaning casually against a bulkhead, looking far too pleased with themselves. Calem, they greeted, their grin a slice of moonlight in the dim corridor. Taruk, Calem replied, eyeing them with a mix of suspicion and weary resignation. Lurking in the shadows now? What, no dramatic entrance? Saving that for the right moment, Taruk said with a wink. Heard you've been making waves. Big ones. More like ripples in a very dangerous pond, Calem corrected. And I'm not exactly swimming. Taruk's grin widened. Good. Means you're getting somewhere. Getting somewhere? Calem echoed, incredulous. Feels more like I'm getting to the edge of a cliff. Sometimes that's where you find the best view, Taruk shot back, their optimism grating as a whetstone. Calem sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. All right, out with it. You know something I don't? Maybe, Taruk replied, their tone teasing. Or maybe I just know people who know things. Great, Calem muttered. The oracle speaks in riddles. Look, Taruk said, more serious now. There's talk of a coalition. Several planets banding together to exploit Zephyria. It's bigger than just Avanta. Figures, Calem replied tersely. And here I thought I just had to worry about one corporate behemoth. Life's full of surprises, Taruk said, their tone lightening again. But hey, if you didn't like a challenge, you wouldn't be here. Or I'd be dead, Calem retorted. Maybe both. Who knows? True, Taruk conceded, offering a smile that was almost genuine. Just watch your back, alright? Not everyone's as friendly as me. Calem nodded, watching as Taruk disappeared down the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the silence. He was left alone with his thoughts, a precarious balance of information and uncertainty teetering in his mind. He had a decision to make, a path to choose in this tangled web of deceit and danger. But first, he needed more information, something to confirm his suspicions beyond cryptic warnings and offhand remarks. Calem made his way back to his quarters, hoping to find some clue in the chaos of his personal data files. He'd been assembling bits and pieces of reports, rumors, and half-heard conversations, trying to stitch together a picture of the conspiracy he was now trapped in. As he combed through the data, a pattern began to emerge, a trail of breadcrumbs that led to several key players, each with a vested interest in the deteriorating situation on Zephyria. Names and faces flashed across his screen, some familiar, others less so but with ties to powerful entities. Avanta might have been the face of the operation, but the true puppeteers were spread across the galaxy, manipulating events from the shadows. Corporations, officials, clandestine organizations, all with their eyes on Zephyria's resources, all eager to take their slice of the pie, no matter the cost. Calem's breath caught as he realized the magnitude of the conspiracy. This wasn't just about one planet's survival, it was a galactic power play, with Zephyria as the pawn. His role in the tribunal was a sideshow compared to the real stakes at play. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion settling over him like a weighted blanket. The next steps were critical, and any misstep could tip the delicate balance into chaos. He needed allies, and he needed them fast. The cosmic lament seemed like a logical place to start. The bar was a nexus of information, and if there was anyone who knew more about the undercurrents of power and greed swirling through the galaxy, it would be the patrons drowning their sorrows and secrets in cheap booze. Calem arrived to find the place bustling, a cacophony of voices and clinking glasses. He scanned the room, looking for familiar faces, those who might be sympathetic to his cause, or at least not actively plotting his demise. The Zephyrian hydrologist from earlier caught his eye, still nursing the same suspiciously iridescent drink. Calem slid into a seat opposite them, offering a nod of recognition. "Mind if I join? Everyone's welcome in the gutter," the hydrologist replied, their voice tinged with a wry humor. "Charming place," Calem said, signaling the bartender to bring him another drink. "Heard anything interesting lately?" The hydrologist eyed him over the rim of their glass, considering. "Depends on what you find interesting." "Anything about Zephyria?" Calem pressed. "Or the powers that be?" A thin smile creased their lips. "There's always talk. Corporations, coalitions. Everyone wants a piece of something. You know how it is." "Yeah," Calem said, taking a sip of his drink. "I just want to know if I'm barking up the right tree or just barking mad." "Probably both," the hydrologist replied, setting their glass down with a soft clink. "But you didn't hear that from me." "Of course not," Calem said, matching their smile with one of his own. "Thanks for the insight." They nodded, a wordless acknowledgement of the understanding between them. In a galaxy teetering on the edge of chaos, it was the unspoken alliances that often proved the most reliable. Calem sipped his drink, pondering his next move. He was in deep, and the deeper he dug, the more he uncovered a mess of ambitions and betrayals. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined, and the more he knew, the more he realized how little he was prepared to handle it alone. He needed to rally support, to gather those who might be willing to stand against the tide of greed and destruction. But in a world where trust was as rare as a winning lottery ticket, that was easier said than done. His thoughts were interrupted by a familiar presence sliding into the seat next to him. Taruk had returned, a conspiratorial gleam in their eyes. "So, figured out your next move yet?" "Not yet," Calem admitted, setting his glass down with a sigh. "But I'm working on it." "Well, if you've got a plan, I'm all ears," Taruk said, their smile almost encouraging. "I like to be on the winning side." "Yeah, me too," Calem said, though his voice lacked the conviction he wished it had. "But right now, I'm just trying to figure out which side that is." "Then let's find out together," Taruk suggested, their tone light but with an undercurrent of seriousness. "Two heads are better than one, right?" Calem looked at Taruk, considering their offer. In a universe where alliances were as fleeting as shooting stars, maybe this was the best shot he had. He raised his glass in a silent toast, a gesture of tentative agreement. "Here's to not getting vaporized," he said, the edge of a grin twitching at his lips. "Cheers," Taruk replied, clinking their glass against Calem's. As they drank, Calem felt a flicker of hope, fragile but persistent. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but with any luck, and a little help, he might just navigate it without losing his head. He had no illusions about the challenges before him. The galaxy was a treacherous place, full of shadows and whispers, But for now, he had a path, however uncertain. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. Here's to whatever comes next, Calem said, setting his glass down with a determined thud. Whatever it is, Taruk agreed, their eyes bright with the thrill of the unknown. Together, they faced the uncertain future, the storm of conspiracies and secrets swirling around them. It was a gamble, a leap into the void, but one they were willing to take together. And for Calem, that was a start. Calem Voss stood in the center of a cosmic mess, one foot in the tribunal and the other in the gutter. It wasn't the first time he found himself treading the thin line between right and wrong, but it was certainly the most precarious. As he took another swig of the lukewarm drink in his hand, he pondered how he'd let himself get tangled in this web of interplanetary greed and deceit. Everyone had their price, and Calem was starting to think his was too low. The tribunal was the next step in this disaster, a judicial circus where the ringmasters had greasy palms and the clowns had knives. Calem had been trying to make sense of the accusations, the conspiracies, the planet-sized egos, but all he had to show for it was a headache and a glass of something that tasted like antifreeze. Just as he was about to leave the cosmic lament for the tribunal stand, he felt a subtle shift in the air, less a breeze and more like a cold breath on the back of his neck. Calem Voss, a voice crooned, oozing with the kind of confidence that usually ended with someone tied to a chair. Calem turned, already regretting that decision. A figure loomed out of the dim, dressed in a suit that looked like it had been designed by a committee of accountants. I wasn't expecting company, Calem said, trying to match the newcomer's smirk with one of his own. Especially not the kind without a heart. The goon chuckled, a sound with all the warmth of a malfunctioning airlock. Oh, I'm just the welcoming committee. Let's take a little walk. And if I prefer to stay seated? Calem asked, already knowing the answer but unable to resist the snark. Then I make things uncomfortable, the goon replied. And trust me, you won't like my version of uncomfortable. Calem stood, sighing as he set his drink aside. Lead the way then. Nothing like a surprise abduction to start the afternoon. The walk was short, which Calem supposed was a mercy. The hallway twisted and turned like the plot of a bad holo serial, and he half expected to see himself listed as the next victim in the credits. They stopped at a door that looked as inviting as a dentist's chair, and the goon shoved him through with all the subtlety of a planetary bombardment. Inside, the room was barren except for a single chair bolted to the floor and a dim light overhead. It was a classic interrogation setup, right down to the stains on the floor that screamed, "You should run while you still can." "Here we are," the goon said, gesturing to the chair. "Make yourself comfortable." "Comfort's overrated," Calem replied, scanning the room for any potential escape routes or blunt objects, not that he expected to find any. Whoever planned this little meeting had thought of everything, except maybe the fact that Calem had a big mouth and a knack for talking his way out of trouble. The goon left, the door sealing shut with ominous finality. Calem sat in the chair, the cold metal seeping into his bones. He didn't have to wait long before the door opened again and a new figure entered, cloaked in shadows and menace. "Calem Voss," they said, sitting across from him with the grace of a predatory cat. "You've been causing quite the ruckus." "It's a gift," Calem replied, trying to keep his tone light. "Who are you, and why should I care?" "Call me Xandar," they said, leaning forward. "And you should care because I'm offering you a way out." "Out of what?" Calem asked, feigning ignorance. "This room, the tribunal, my own personal hell, all of the above," Xandar replied, their smile chilling. "You're about to walk into a tribunal that's rigged against you. I'm offering you the chance to disappear." Calem chuckled, a dry sound that echoed in the empty room. "Disappear? That's your pitch? I thought you were going to offer me a shiny new spaceship and the map to the outer reaches." "You think this is a joke, Voss?" Xandar asked, their voice hardening. "Everything's a joke," Calem replied, "until someone gets hurt. And newsflash, I don't like getting hurt." "Your testimony could ruin more than just Avanta," Xandar said, ignoring Calem's sarcasm. "You're stepping on some very big toes. Isn't that what shoes are for?" Calem quipped. "Besides, if they're that big, they should watch where they're stepping." "Smart mouth," Xandar said, though there was a hint of amusement in their eyes. "But keep it up, and you'll end up dead." Calem shrugged, as if they'd just informed him it might rain tomorrow. "We're all dying, friend. It's just a matter of timing." Xandar leaned back, studying Calem with a calculating gaze. "Still, it's a shame. You could have been an asset." "I prefer to think of myself as a liability," Calem said, crossing his arms as best as he could in the awkward chair. "Now, if we're done here, I've got a tribunal to attend." "You think you'll walk out of here?" Xandar asked, incredulous. Calem grinned, a crooked, reckless grin. "Why not? You haven't killed me yet." Xandar stood, their expression unreadable. "We'll see about that." With a nod to the unseen goons lurking in the shadows, Xandar left the room. The door closed with a finality that left no room for doubt about the gravity of his situation. Calem took a deep breath, trying to shake off the tension sitting on him like a weight. Now, it was time to think. Think fast, think smart. His only options when brute force was off the table. He scanned the room again, this time noting the camera in the corner. Not an escape route, but useful information nonetheless. All right, Voss, he muttered to himself. Time to make your own luck. He wiggled his hands, feeling the cuffs that subtly restrained him. Not tight enough to prevent movement, but secure enough to make escape a challenge. His mind raced, thoughts flickering like a strobe light as he tried to piece together a plan. And then it hit him. A gamble, a long shot, but better than sitting and waiting for the axe to fall. He slumped in the chair, letting his body go limp. The trick was to look defeated, like a marionette with its strings cut. He closed his eyes, willing his breath to slow, his muscles to relax. It was a game of patience now, waiting for his captors to take the bait. Minutes passed, each one stretching into an eternity, and just when Calem began to doubt his plan, the door creaked open. A goon stepped inside, probably expecting a corpse rather than an escape artist. Calem moved fast, his muscles snapping into action like a coil spring. He surged forward, driving his shoulder into the goon's midsection with enough force to knock the wind out of them. The goons staggered, their grip on the weapon slackening, and Calem seized his chance. He grabbed the blaster before it hit the ground, whirling around to face the door. The other goon, startled by the sudden turn of events, fumbled for their own weapon. But Calem was faster, more desperate, and he fired a shot that sizzled through the air, connecting with the second goon with a satisfying thud. Calem spun around, panting, adrenaline singing through his veins. He had seconds, maybe less, before reinforcements arrived. He kicked the fallen goon's weapon further away to prevent any surprises and darted towards the door. The corridor beyond was a maze, but Calem had a knack for navigating chaos. He sprinted down the hall, counting on luck and his own reckless instincts to guide him. Doors blurred past as he ran, one direction as good as another in his desperate race for freedom. He could hear footsteps pounding behind him, the shouts of his pursuers echoing in the distance. The tribunal was the last place they expected him to go, but Calem had no choice but to make a beeline for the courtroom. He skidded around a corner, nearly losing his footing on the slick metal floor. The pounding of his heart was deafening, a drumbeat of survival that drove him forward. As he reached the entrance to the tribunal chamber, he could see it was already in session. Faces turned, eyes widening in shock and disbelief as Calem burst through the doors, the sound of his entrance silencing the room. The judge looked up, their expression a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Mr. Voss," they said, voice dripping with disdain. "You've arrived just in time." Calem didn't have the breath for a witty retort, so he settled for a nod. The spectators watched, curiosity and anticipation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. He took his place at the tribunal stand, the weight of his journey settling on his shoulders. He was here, against all odds, and now it was time to see if he could turn the tide of this galactic farce. "Let's get this circus over with," Calem said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside him. "I've got places to be." The tribunal resumed, the air heavy with tension and unspoken questions. Calem knew the path ahead was fraught with danger, but for now, he had a chance, however slim, to make his voice heard. And in a universe where silence was as deadly as a bullet, that was more than he could have hoped for. Calem Voss had once heard the phrase, "out of the frying pan, into the fire." It seemed as if his life was a constant exercise in proving it true. There he was, standing at the tribunal stand, feeling like an intergalactic gladiator about to face one seriously unimpressed crowd. The gallery was full of eyes, each pair more judgmental than the last, and he couldn't shake the feeling he was about to be skewered on a spit of bureaucracy and red tape. He sucked in a breath, the breathing mask making the simple act of inhalation feel like sucking air through a damp sock. His thoughts were a chaotic jumble, much like the state of his shirt, disheveled and slightly stained, but he shook them into some semblance of order. His escape from Xandar's little playroom of doom had left him with a swagger, albeit a tired one. "Calem Voss," the judge intoned, staring down at him with the benevolence of a tax collector. "You arrive at this tribunal uninvited and out of order. Can't have a circus without a clown," Calem shot back, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. He never could resist poking a bear, even when the bear had a gavel and the power to ruin his already questionable reputation. A murmur rippled through the gathered officials, the intrigue of his sudden appearance cutting through the tedium like a knife through synthetic butter. The Avantorian representative glared daggers at him, their face a mask of barely contained disdain. Silverthra, the Zephirian ambassador, gave him a nod that was so slight it might have been a trick of the light. Or maybe a spasm, it was hard to tell with her. The judge, a relic who looked like they'd been defrosted for this very occasion, rapped their gavel with a sound heavier than the gravity on a neutron star. "Mr. Voss, you will be silent until called upon to speak." Calem obliged, crossing his arms and leaning back with an air of nonchalance that would have been more convincing if he wasn't still catching his breath. He swept his gaze over the room, cataloguing the players in this little galactic melodrama. The Zephirian hydrologist, a thin, wiry fellow who looked like he survived on a diet of stress and algae, was standing by, ready to unleash a torrent of accusations against the Avantorians. He was the kind of guy who could have a nervous breakdown if the wind changed direction. Next to him, the Avantorian representative oozed smugness, like they were sitting on the winning hand in a high-stakes poker game. A creature with all the charm of a tax audit, they offered Calem a sneer that promised retribution. Or maybe just indigestion. The AI announcer, perched overhead like an overly eager parrot, droned on about procedural justice and impartial hearings, a cosmic joke if ever there was one. Calem chuckled under his breath, the sound lost in the echoes of the chamber. His mind drifted to recent events, the escape that had brought him here. He'd been a step ahead, sure, but not without help. The Zephirian resistance, a ragtag group of rebels with a penchant for dramatic rescues, had played their part. They'd been the ones to distract Xander's goons long enough for Calem to make his move. Their message was clear. Avanta's mining operations threatened Zephiria's very existence, and Calem's voice was a weapon in their fight. The thought of allies was a strange one to Calem. He wasn't used to the idea of people having his back. Usually, they were more interested in stabbing it. The proceedings continued, with Silverthra stepping forward to address the tribunal. Her voice was calm, composed, the kind that could lull even the most hyperactive child to sleep, if it weren't for the sharp edge of steel beneath the surface. "Honorable Tribunal," Silverthra began, with a formality that made Calem want to roll his eyes. "The allegations against Avanta are not without merit. Their mining operations on Zephyria have resulted in catastrophic water depletion, threatening our planet's very survival." The Avantorian representative opened their mouth to counter, but Calem cut in, his patience wearing thinner than a cheap spacesuit in a meteor storm. "Save it," he said, matching their glare with one of his own. "We all know what's going on here. You dig, we dry up. Simple math." The judge's gavel came down with a sound that would have put thunder to shame. "Mr. Voss, you will control yourself. This is not a forum for theatrics." Calem's grin was as sharp as a comet's tail. "If you want quiet compliance, you should have picked a different martyr." The room fell silent. It was the kind of silence that preceded either a storm or a surrender. Calem was betting on the former. Behind him, the doors to the courtroom creaked open, and a figure stepped in. It was Xandar, looking as unruffled as if they were out for an afternoon stroll. They sidled up to the Avantorian representative, whispering something that made the rep's expression change from smug to something much colder. Calem caught Xandar's eye, offering a sarcastic little wave. "Nice of you to join us," he called out, his voice carrying in the oppressive quiet. Xandar merely inclined their head, a gesture of acknowledgement or warning, it was hard to tell which. But their presence was a reminder that Calem's escape hadn't gone unnoticed, and the stakes were as high as they were deadly. Silverthra continued, unfazed by the newcomer. "Zephyria has long been a peaceful planet, dedicated to the preservation of our natural resources. Avanta's actions have forced our hand." The judge turned their attention back to Calem, their expression one of weary resignation. "Mr. Voss, you have been called here to provide testimony. Do you intend to comply, or will we need to find you a more secure location in which to contemplate your choices?" Calem considered his options, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a black hole. He could see the specter of his future hovering in the periphery, a shadowy figure with the power to change everything. His resolve hardened, a determination that filled the cracks left by uncertainty. He was here for a reason, and it wasn't to be the galaxy's whipping boy. "I'll speak," he said finally, his voice steady. "But I've got nothing to say that everyone here doesn't already know." There was a surprised murmur from the gallery, the sound of an audience caught off guard by an unexpected plot twist. Even the judge seemed momentarily taken aback. Calem continued, "You want to talk about justice? Let's start with the basics. Zephiria's dying because Avanta's greed knows no bounds. You can dress it up however you like, but it won't change the facts." The Avantorian representative stood, their face a mask of indignation. "This tribunal is not a place for baseless accusations," they said, their voice as cold as the void. "Our operations are fully compliant with interstellar regulations." "Regulations written by Avanta, for Avanta," Silverthra interjected, her words carrying the weight of 1,000 simmering grievances. We've seen the damage your compliance has wrought. Calem nodded, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. It's a rigged game, he said, meeting the judge's eyes. But some of us aren't playing by your rules anymore. Xandar leaned back, their expression unreadable. But Calem could sense the shift, the knowledge that this wasn't going to be a simple matter of silencing a dissenting voice. The judge cleared their throat, the sound like sandpaper on metal. We will deliberate on the evidence presented. Mr. Voss, you are dismissed. Calem turned to leave, the weight of the tribunal's gaze heavy on his back. He knew he was walking a razor's edge, but it was a path he'd chosen for himself. Outside the chamber, the air was cooler, the oppressive atmosphere of the tribunal left behind. Silverthra caught up with him, her expression one of cautious optimism. That was unexpected, she said, her voice a careful balance between praise and caution. Calem shrugged, the motion loosening the tension in his shoulders. I've always been good at surprising people. It's the sticking around afterwards that's the trick. She smiled, a rare expression that lit up her features. You've made an impact, Calem. People are starting to listen. The problem with listening, Calem replied, is that it usually leads to doing something about it. They walked together in silence, the weight of their shared mission binding them in an unspoken alliance. Calem's thoughts were a swirl of possibilities, each one leading down a path fraught with danger and uncertainty. He was a man caught in a web of interplanetary greed and deceit, treading the line between right and wrong. But for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose, a clarity that cut through the chaos. What's next? Silverthra asked as they reached the edge of the sprawling complex that housed the tribunal. Calem paused, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond. Now we wait, he said finally, his voice laced with a grim resolve. And hope the galaxy's ready for a little truth. Silverthra nodded, her expression thoughtful. The tribunal will deliberate, but their decision won't be the end of this. No, Calem agreed, just the beginning. And with that, they parted ways, each carrying the weight of their shared struggle, the knowledge that the battle for Zephyria was far from over. Calem watched her go, a sense of calm settling over him like a cloak. He was ready for whatever came next, the fire in his veins burning brighter than ever. The universe was a dark and dangerous place, but Calem Voss was a man who'd made a habit of thriving in the shadows. And now, it was time to see if those shadows could be turned against those who sought to wield them. Calem sat down at the bar of the Cosmic Lament, where even the neon sign looked like it had given up on life, its flickering glow casting tired shadows over the tables. The bartender, a grizzled old soul with a face like a well-worn asteroid, slid a drink Calem's way. It was a murky concoction that promised a swift descent into oblivion, just what he needed. Rough day at the circus? The bartender asked, his voice as gravelly as a meteor shower on a tin roof. Calem took a sip, grimaced, and decided it was still better than listening to the Avantorian representative drone on about compliance. Let's just say the clowns are running the show. Ain't that always the way? The bartender chuckled, polishing a glass with a rag that seemed more dirt than cloth. You going to save the day, hero? Hero? Calem scoffed, setting the glass down with a thud. I'm no hero, just a guy trying to keep from getting shoved out an airlock. Before the bartender could respond, the AI announcer's voice crackled to life over the bar's tired speakers, announcing the tribunal's decision was imminent. Calem could almost hear the gears of the bureaucratic machine grinding to a halt, trying to spit out something resembling justice. Guess that's my cue, Calem muttered, tossing a few credits onto the bar. Keep the rock gut warm for me. The bartender nodded, giving him a look that was either pity or indigestion. Good luck, kid, you'll need it. Back at the tribunal, the atmosphere was tense enough to cut with a laser scalpel. The Zephyrian hydrologist had broken into a cold sweat, looking like he was about to either faint or combust. The Avantorian representative sat with their arms crossed, exuding a confidence that was almost as nauseating as Calem's drink. The judge, perched high above the assembled masses like a vulture with a gavel, called the tribunal to order. Mr. Voss, you have been granted one final opportunity to present your testimony. We expect clarity, not dramatics. Clarity, huh? Calem said, stepping forward, a grin tugging at his lips. I'll do my best, but I make no promises. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, feeling the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Ladies and gentlemen of this esteemed tribunal, he began, injecting just the right amount of sarcasm into the words. We're here to determine whether Avanta's mining operations have turned Zephyria from a paradise into a dust bowl. I think the answer's pretty obvious, but let's humor the process. A ripple of unease passed through the room, the assembled throng shifting like nervous insects. Avanta's been playing a dirty game, Calem continued. They've been siphoning off water reserves and selling them to the highest bidder. And they've been covering their tracks with enough red tape to strangle a star cruiser. That's a serious allegation, Mr. Voss, the judge intoned, eyes narrowing. Serious? Absolutely, Calem agreed. But I've got something to back it up. Something even Avanta can't deny. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small data chip with an exaggerated flourish. Behold, the keys to the kingdom. Or at least to a very large, very illegal operation. The Avantorian representative leaped to their feet, outrage coloring their features. This is preposterous. Fabricated data at best, Mr. Voss. Sit down and shut up, Calem snapped, his voice as sharp as broken glass. You had your turn, now it's mine. The judge gestured for silence, the gavel poised like an executioner's sword. Mr. Voss, you will present your evidence without delay. Calem nodded, his fingers dancing over the tribunal's interface. The room's holographic display flickered to life, casting an eerie glow over the proceedings. The images revealed schematics, transaction logs, and communication intercepts, evidence so damning it could have melted the ice on Pluto. The silence that followed was the kind that comes after an explosion, the kind that leaves ears ringing and hearts pounding. Silverthra stood, her expression a mix of vindication and disbelief. These records, where did you get them? Calem smiled, a wolfish grin that showed far too many teeth. Let's just say Avanta's cyber defenses aren't as impenetrable as they think. A little human ingenuity goes a long way. The judge leaned back, their expression carefully neutral. This evidence, if verified, could indeed support the allegations against Avanta. Steps must be taken to authenticate these documents. Calem's heart pounded in his chest, his pulse a relentless drumbeat. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. But the hardest part was yet to come. Your Honors, he said, his voice firm. I'm not here to argue the authenticity of these files. I'm here to tell you that Zephyria is dying, and time is running out. You want justice? Then stop Avanta before there's nothing left to save. The judge's expression softened, ever so slightly. We will deliberate on the evidence. Mr. Voss, you may step down. Calem returned to his seat, feeling the eyes of the tribunal bore into him like lasers. He'd thrown the dice, and now all he could do was wait for them to land. The deliberation took less time than he'd expected. Perhaps the tribunal, buried under a mountain of damning evidence, realized there wasn't much left to discuss. Or maybe they were just eager to wrap things up before the whole place went up in flames. The judge cleared their throat, the sound echoing through the chamber like the death knell of a dying star. The tribunal has reached a decision. Based on the evidence presented, we hereby order the immediate suspension of all Avantorian mining operations on Zephyria, pending further investigation. A murmur of disbelief and relief swept through the chamber, the tension melting away like ice under a merciless sun. Calem felt a thrill of vindication, tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The Avantorian representative spluttered in outrage, their composure crumbling faster than a cheap hologram. This is outrageous. We'll appeal. We'll. Calem rose, cutting him off with a dismissive wave. You'll do nothing except watch as your empire crumbles. Welcome to your reckoning. Silverthra approached, a rare smile gracing her lips. You did it, Calem. You actually did it. He shrugged, fighting the urge to let his guard down. I had a little help from my friends. She laughed, a sound that was equal parts disbelief and admiration. Well, it looks like the galaxy might just owe you one. We'll see, Calem replied, his voice weary but satisfied. I've never been good with debts. As the crowd dispersed, the weight of the past few days began to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. Calem knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like they had a real chance. Outside the tribunal, the air was sweet with the promise of change. Calem took a deep breath, savoring the moment before reality crashed back in. So, what's next for the great Calem Voss? Silverthra asked, falling into step beside him. First, he said, I'm going to find the strongest drink in the galaxy and celebrate not being dead. After that, who knows? She nodded, her smile softening. Whatever happens, just remember, you made a difference. I'll try to keep that in mind, Calem replied, a hint of humor creeping back into his voice. But if I end up floating in space, broke and alone, I'm blaming you. Silverthra laughed, the sound a balm against the chaos of the universe. I'll take that risk. They parted ways at the edge of the complex, and Calem watched her go, a sense of satisfaction settling over him. For the first time in a long time, things felt right, as if the universe had finally decided to throw him a bone instead of a boulder. He made his way back to the cosmic lament, the anticipation of that drink driving him forward. The bartender greeted him with a nod, already reaching for a bottle of something that looked like it could strip paint off a hull. To victory, Calem said, raising the glass in a toast to the shadows and the light that seemed a little less oppressive now. To survival, the bartender counted, clinking his own glass against Calem's. And to whatever comes next. Calem drank deeply, letting the burn chase away the ghosts and fears that had haunted him for so long. He was ready for whatever the galaxy threw at him next, even if it was just another round of bureaucratic nonsense. Because in the end, Calem Voss was a man who knew how to survive, one way or another. And with allies like Silverthrow and the Zephirians, maybe, just maybe, the future didn't look quite so bleak. And that, for now, was enough. The AI announcer's voice had barely faded when Calem Voss found himself surrounded by well-wishers, their hands thrust out in congratulations. He accepted the accolades with the grace of a man who'd just emerged from a garbage compactor and was trying to pretend he didn't still stink of refuse. Mr. Voss, that was some show, an enthusiastic bureaucrat declared, eyes shining with admiration. You've saved Zephyria, Calem snorted, a dry, humorless sound. Yeah, I'm sure they'll be naming schools after me in no time. Don't forget to buy your Calem Voss commemorative lunchbox. Comes with a free set of goggles to protect you from all the dust we didn't save. The bureaucrat blinked, clearly not sure if Calem was joking. Spoiler, he was, sort of. Silverthrow approached, weaving through the crowd like a snake through tall grass. Calem, I thought you'd have run for the nearest shuttle by now. Tempting, he replied, but I figured I should hang around, soak up the glory. Or at least the free drinks. You're a real hero, you know, she said, though her tone suggested she was testing out the phrase to see how ridiculous it sounded. The answer was, very. Hero? Nah, Calem said, waving her off. Just a guy who knew the right people to bribe and the right servers to hack. Let's not make this into a fairy tale. Silverthrow's smile was wry. So what's next for the galaxy's most reluctant savior? Calem shrugged, a practiced gesture that communicated both apathy and a chronic backache. Dunno, probably find the next planet in need of a patsy. Seems to be my calling. She laughed, the kind of laugh that came from a place between disbelief and respect. We could use more patsies like you. Thanks, but there's only so much self-sacrifice I can handle before breakfast, he replied, glancing at the nearby holo screen displaying galactic news, likely featuring his mug by now under the headline, Man Accidentally Saves Planet. The Avantorian representative slunk past, like a cat that had just been booted off a particularly warm desk. Calem caught their eye and tipped an imaginary hat, the kind of gesture that might get you punched in another setting. Enjoy the limelight, the representative muttered, barely audible over the chatter. It won't last, Calem grinned, neither will your mining license. Funny how that works out. The rep's face twisted into something like a pained grimace, and they disappeared into the crowd, likely plotting their next bureaucratic revenge. Think they'll be back? Silverthrow asked, watching the rep's retreating figure. Oh, definitely. Like a rash that just keeps coming back, Calem replied. But that's tomorrow's problem. The cosmic lament beckoned like a lighthouse for the perpetually lost. Inside, the air was thick with smoke from a dozen different planets, each with its own unique way of slowly killing you. Or fast, depending on the drink specials. The bartender, with the aura of someone who'd seen it all and was thoroughly unimpressed, slid a drink over to him as he approached. Heard you made quite the scene at the tribunal. Wasn't me. Must have been some other devilishly handsome man, Calem replied, taking a sip of whatever concoction had found its way into his hand. It tasted like victory and antifreeze. They're talking about you on the holo news, the bartender continued, nodding towards a screen that flickered in the corner. Saying you're a symbol of hope for the galaxy. Calem choked on his drink, sputtering. Hope? Me? Clearly, they've never seen my tax returns. Hey, if it makes people feel better, why not? The bartender shrugged. Gotta cling to something, right? Yeah, like the edge of a cliff, Calem agreed, settling into a chair that groaned under the weight of existential dread. Or maybe just his own backside. Silverthrow joined him, raising her glass in a toast. To the future. To not getting spaced, Calem countered. And maybe, just maybe, a little peace and quiet. Ambitious, she said, chuckling. But stranger things have happened. Like what? The galaxy suddenly deciding it likes my face? He asked, genuinely curious. Well, the galaxy's full of surprises, she replied, finishing her drink. And I think you've just scratched the surface. Calem leaned back, letting the familiar murmur of the bar wash over him. In a few hours, he'd be back on his ship, heading to parts unknown, where trouble probably had his name on a list somewhere. But for now, he was content to sit, drink, and wonder how the hell he'd managed to pull off a miracle. Not bad for a guy who'd spent most of his life trying to avoid being noticed. The ship was an old model, reliable in the way that a stubborn mule refuses to die. Calem stood in the cargo bay, surveying the minimal supplies he'd managed to scrape together. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get him to the next star system. Leaving already? Silverthra asked, appearing at the top of the ramp like some kind of enigmatic statue. I thought you'd stick around to enjoy your newfound fame. Fame and I don't get along, Calem said, checking the inventory for the third time. It's the kind of relationship where one of us always ends up getting shot. So where are you headed? Wherever they don't have my face plastered on wanted posters, he replied, looking up with a sardonic grin. Which is getting harder to find, believe it or not. Well, wherever you go, remember that you've got allies here, she said, sincerity slipping through her usual diplomatic armor like a crack in a battleship's hull. He paused, meeting her gaze with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. I'll keep that in mind. And if you ever need someone to hack into a corrupt corporation's database, you know where to find me. Don't worry, I've got your contact information stored safely, she assured him, as though her Rolodex was some kind of galactic safety deposit box. Good to know, he said, nodding. Because I think we've only just started shaking the hornet's nest. Best of luck, Calem Voss, Silverthra said, extending a hand. He shook it, noting that she didn't try to steal any fingers in the process. And to you, for whatever comes next. Try to keep the peace. I'll do what I can, she promised, stepping back as he closed the cargo bay doors. With a final nod, he made his way to the cockpit, the ship's systems humming to life around him. As he settled into the pilot's seat, he couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation, an old friend he hadn't seen in far too long. The engines roared to life, and he guided the ship skyward, the stars above spreading out like a glittering tapestry, minus the purple prose, of course. Just a whole lot of vast, empty, and potentially dangerous space. Here we go again, he muttered to himself, setting a course for the unknown. Calem Voss, professional scapegoat and accidental hero, at your service. And with that, he was gone, leaving Zephyria behind and heading toward whatever trouble awaited him next. Because in the grand scheme of things, he was just a man with a ship, a knack for getting into the kind of situations most people spent their lives avoiding, and maybe, just maybe, a shot at making a difference. Even if it was entirely by accident.